Introducing.
Alright guys, this is water pollution. This is talking about 14A. Let's go ahead and get through it real quickly. Alright, this was just one of the slides that you guys did today or a couple days ago in class. This is the list of sources of materials that get into the water, how to remove it on this side. So if you want to pause the video and kind of look through this right here, that'd be good. So this lets you know what's going on in each one. It's a pretty good little board. And then these are the effects it has on human health right here. Okay, in general, they're going to affect the body. They're usually going to cause cancer. Mercury causes a nervous system problem, so it's really interesting to kind of look into those. Over here. Okay, so this is just some of the stuff if you were looking to kind of fill in your note card. I thought this was a pretty good thing. And I have a video online of manure lagoons, so you can see like kind of the anaerobic respiration. The process, you can actually see the bubbles rising up in the lagoon, so it's kind of worth looking at that. It's kind of interesting. And with acid mine drainage, it's very interesting because the breaking of old rocks in the ground releases arsenic naturally. So that's one of the problems with mining. It leaves behind those sorts of things. Okay, let's look at this guy over here. This is a pretty good board as well. Eutrophication, there's two types of eutrophications. One which is natural, which comes from just nutrients accumulating from dead organic material. Cultural eutrophication has to do with people, anthropogenic. Okay, here are the pros and cons of septic tanks versus sewage plants, and the differentiation between the location pros and cons. There's a positive feedback loop of dissolved oxygen. So this is what happens with dead zones and things like that. So what happens when you have dissolved oxygen depletion? Well, more things die. So then what ends up happening? Microbes consume more, and that takes oxygen to do. So guess what? It's going to take more oxygen out, and then guess what? You get dead material, things die, things decompose. Microbes consume it, and guess what? You end up with a complete dead zone after a while. It's a positive feedback loop with that one. And then it was interesting to see that little graphical representation of the parts of the Gulf that have really large dead zones, right? So think about what we learned about in the fuel documentary, like the little oil alleys, right, in different states, Louisiana. Okay, let's move on. Okay, so what is water pollution? Contamination of streams, rivers, lakes, oceans, groundwater with substances produced through human activities. Wastewater is water produced by livestock operations and human activities, including sewage from toilets and gray water from bathing, washing clothes, dishes, etc. Okay, so there's a difference between point source pollution, which is a distinct place where the matter is actually being put into the water, and then non-point source, which is kind of a diffuse area of pollution, which is usually you're going to see that in things like estuaries and watersheds, right? Watersheds that feed from many different sources out into like maybe a large body of water like the ocean, right? So just kind of think like if you have like some land, or if we have like some land here, right? So this is the land, then we have like a bunch of rivers, small streams feeding into one mega stream or something, right? If we had like all little bits of pollution coming in like this, flowing into like these little streams here, what do they end up doing? This way, and then eventually make their way into the ocean, something like that, right? So these little locations up here might represent point source pollution, wherever these little red streams are coming from. But once they get into here, we have non-point source. All right. Problems from wastewater fall into three categories: oxygen demand, nutrient release, and disease-causing organisms, which are all pretty self-explanatory. Okay, BOD is biochemical oxygen demand, the amount of oxygen a quantity of water uses over a period of time at specific temperatures. And this can change based on things that are happening there. Okay, dead zone, a body of water, an area with extremely low oxygen concentration and very little life. And that's what we were just talking about with that positive feedback loop. And we're actually going to be doing a lab which looks at dissolved oxygen. All right, so nutrient release, these are ways that nutrients can get into the water, eutrophication. A body of water becomes rich in nutrients, and that could be from decaying plant matter just naturally. And cultural eutrophication, an increase in fertility, usually because of anthropogenic. And you need to know that anthropos means human, and it is the cause of humans, so from humans. So that's how you differentiate, like maybe what like a beaver does, where it chops down trees, and that tree's matter ends up decomposing in the water and releasing nutrients. And people, washing their clothes that are full of different types of phosphates and things like that, as cleaning agents that get into the water, that's cultural eutrophication, right? Eutrophication causes rapid growth of algae, which you're like, hey, how is that absorbing oxygen? They're plants, don't they release oxygen as a byproduct? Well, when they die, the microorganisms are going to consume them, and in order to carry out their own life functions, they require O2. So you're going to have maybe some O2 increase for a little bit because of the algae, but as soon as the microbes get a hold of them, they end up eating up all of it. All right, so here are disease-causing organisms from drinking, bathing, and sewage. Okay, we all use the same resource depending on different parts of the world. We don't all have the luxury of having distinct water sources all the time. Diseases that can be contracted by coming into contact with water include, these are big ones right here: cholera, typhoid fever, stomach flu, and diarrhea. A lot of people die from these things. We're very lucky to live in a country where these are just momentary discomforts, right? They're not something that we get them, oh, go ahead and just put yourself outside, you're no good anymore, you're dead. All right, disease-causing organisms. Because of the risk that waterborne pathogens pose, we need a way to test for pathogens in our drinking water. But there's so many, and they require very specific tests. So how do we know when it would be a good idea to start testing for lots of different pathogens, lots of different viruses and bacteria? Well, there are these things called indicator species, right? Indicator species. And they're things that you would easily be able to take out and get rid of in your water system if you had even the most basic types of infrastructure to help take care of your water supply. But if you don't have these things in place, these indicator species would thrive. And so we're talking about, things like coliform bacteria here. So if you don't have the means to take care of these guys, there's a good chance that your water is messed up pretty badly. Now, it's okay to have a little bit of this in your water because we have, if you have really large volumes of water, very small culture forming bacteria is considered safe to drink, within reason. Once you start seeing really big percentages of these cultures, it's good to start testing for other types of pathogens that could be potentially more dangerous. Not that this is not something to worry about, though. People die from things like this all the time. All right. We have technologies to treat wastewater, and we're going to talk about those. Okay, this reduces the risk of waterborne pathogens, and there are two ways to do that, either by having a septic system if you're out in the country, so this is more of like a rural. I can't spell right now. Yeah, rural, and sewage treatment plants, right? And these are going to be things that you don't have as much land, so you're going to have places like cities. And they'll centralize the treatment of the water. The cats are fighting. That's awesome. Get out of here. Thank you. All right. So in cities, you're going to have a need for sewage treatment plants because you have less land. That's really what it is. So the difference between these two is land. Sorry. Went off the screen there. Land. All right. So what is a septic system? It's a relatively small and simple treatment system. You should watch the video on this to kind of see how this works. It's pretty neat. It really works off of gravity a whole lot. That's one of the pros of it, is it doesn't take a lot of active energy usage because it's just working off of the different densities, masses, and gravities of the stuff that you flush down the toilet or down your sink. All right, water being in the middle. Right, so if you had 3 distinct layers, you might have like your I'm going to make yellow for things like fatty things that float on top. All right, your dirty water is going to be somewhere here in the middle. Then you'll have your thick particulates the sludge, it sinks to the bottom, right? And so like the water will be able to flow through, and there'll be like some pipes or something here. And the pipes will have these nice holes in them. And I will make the holes white because that's what I feel like right now. Okay, we'll just feel like a nice white little dot, right? And so what will happen here is the water, the dirty parts of the water, or the water in general, will just flow out of these little holes into the surrounding dirt. And the microbes, not only inside the pipe, down here in the sludge and in the fatty parts, the microbes in here will eat up some of the bacteria and the other organic materials here, and make it a little bit more safe for us to come in contact with. And when this water comes out, now it'll have to deal with the stuff that we watched a documentary on, dirt, right? The dirt has all kinds of living microbes in it. It's very easy to forget that one of the main components, most important components of dirt is the living parts of the dirt, right? The actual microbes and things that live inside of it, right? Those are the things that fix the nutrients, they synthesize minerals and make them into things that we use. But so a septic tank takes advantage of all the microbes in the ecosystem, and the plants will eventually eat up the different organic materials, and that's good. So you can kind of think about why it's a good idea if you have a septic system to have a lot of trees, to have a lot of grass, to have a lot of vegetation, right? All right. Okay, and the leach field is what I was talking about here. The leach field is the specific term for the pipes as they let this water out here into the dirt and grass. Okay, so this is what it looks like. Okay. So in developed countries, municipalities use centralized sewage treatment plants, and they get water from hundreds or even thousands of households. So this is primarily what you need when you don't have a lot of land at your disposal. In traditional waste treatment plants, there are 2 phases of treatment, primary and secondary, and you should look in your book for the tertiary steps. Some places are required to do a 3rd step, right? And so you want to look at that. Okay, so here is the process. Here's the process. Start at part 1. Underground pipes carry waste to treatment plant. Large debris filtered out by screens and sent to the landfill. So you get rid of the large debris right here. Okay, and now in primary treatment, this is where you're going to use some of your chemicals to get rid of stuff. But a lot of it here is just physical separation still. Okay, you get into secondary treatment, you have this running water here is aerating. It's adding a lot of O2. And why would we do that? We do that so that we have aerobic digestion of some of the materials here. And what happens here is the stinky stank, I'm just going to put stank, it is a scientific term, stank. The stank decreases because it is being introduced to O2. It's being introduced to O2. So the odors are much less offensive because you're aerating the material there. Okay, so let's see what happens here. If I can zoom out a little bit. 2, it's going out into 2. Oh, let's not get lost in the pipe here. It's down, because what comes after 2? 3 comes after 2. So solid waste settles at the bottom of the tanks. And this stuff's a little harder to get rid of. We're going to have to do some kind of old school medieval stuff to get rid of the sludge. And bacteria from the tank break down organic material, CO2 and inorganic nutrients, and this settles into sludge. Sludge is thickened by removing water. So just think about that. You remove some of the slush by getting rid of the water. Now it's becoming a nice solid material. And then what do we do from it there? Thickened sludge can be taken to a landfill, burned, and used as fertilizer. And at this point, we really want to sanitize the material in this direction, right? So the sludge, the solid material went out that way. But the thing, just like in your septic tank, the heavier stuff sinks to the bottom. The watery stuff is in the middle, right? And over here, this is where we hit it with chlorine, ultraviolet, and other types of chemicals to help clean it. And flocculating agents are going to help throw this stuff down to the bottom, right? Flocculating, right? So that's flocculating agents are going to make things settle out, and you can also use dispersants to get rid of oils and stuff on the top and clump them together. And you guys studied this when you did your different oil accidents, right? So flocculating agents, coagulating agents. dispersants, etc. Okay, and here you can release treated water into a river or a lake, right? And depending on how old your facility is, sometimes if it's an old facility and you get overrun by rainwater, it's actually legal to dump raw sewage to, let up some space for all the incoming water so you don't break anything. So you end up letting out all this raw sewage. This happens up to 40,000 times a year. It's pretty interesting, right? The remedy to that is to just, update your infrastructure, which is easier said than done because that is an expensive feat. Okay, moving right along. Animal feedlots and manure lagoons. Remember that the feedlots we were talking about, those really efficient commercial animal feeding operations, those CAFOs, right? They require somewhere to put that manure. I just want to rewrite that word so that way you remember what that is, CAFOs. It's concentrated animal feeding operations, right? We studied that when we did TAPT, I believe. I think that was the documentary. Okay, so you need somewhere, one of the problems with CAFOs is that you need somewhere to put that crap, right, all that manure. So people make these things called manure lagoons, which are kind of like these large temporary leach fields, almost like septic tanks, just open air septic tanks. I'd really recommend you watch this short, like 1 minute video. There's not even any narration for it. It's just really interesting to see kind of what they look like. Just seeing it, you can smell how crappy it must smell. All right, so what is it? Manure from concentrated animal feeding operations is a problem because of the volume of crap, right? Just like you guys have a large volume of crap to study for this class. It can also contain hormones and antibiotics that are given to animals, right? And if you remember anything we studied about hormones, is that the small doses are actually the ones that are more detrimental than large doses. Interesting, right? So what is a manure lagoon? Human-made pond lined with rubber, built to handle large quantities of manure produced by livestock. After it's broken down by bacteria, it is spread into the field as fertilizers. Now, you can get in trouble for not getting this cleared with a city that you have your CAFO in, because they smell. They smell, and they can, if they're not managed correctly, and they're not inspected correctly, this can cause a lot of damage to the ecosystem, right? Imagine if you let all this raw sewage out into the ground before the microbes are able to break this stuff down, right? It's bad. All right, so let's go on into heavy metals. I'm just going to run through this real quick. Refer back to that chart that you made. You should really study that chart and study the effects and where they come from. All right. So these are the three heavy metals we care about. Lead, and this is particularly important right now in Flint, Michigan. You should watch the short video, everything happening to Flint, Michigan in 3 minutes. You should watch that. Arsenic, there's natural arsenic and there's human activity from mining and industry. And mercury occurs naturally through human activity. And the big one for that is burning coal, right? So it's funny because Mr. Bayona loves to eat what? This guy, right? Tuna. I love to eat tuna. And actually, tuna used to be really high in mercury. It's coming down a little bit recently. But China is coming up in the world as an industrial superpower. And even though they are investing a lot in solar panels, they are also increasing their use of coal for their energy production. So there's a good chance in the next 20 to 30 years that the mercury in tuna is going to shoot up quite a bit. All right, so you need to know how to read graphs. So let's look at this real quick. So arsenic. Purple is bad. That's what we're looking at here. Purple is bad. And this is micrograms per liter. Even though it seems really small, there is not a really super safe amount of arsenic that we should be able to get. There were some fights between the EPA and companies. They said they wanted it down to like 5 micrograms. And the companies argued that it would be too expensive, so they were able to go from 50 to 10 at least, right? So that's not so bad. Hawaii, we don't have any because that's how we roll in Hawaii. We don't have time for arsenic. Alaska, well, we can forgive Alaska. Nobody lives up here, so I guess that's why. But Hawaii, yeah, I'm kind of proud of us. It's nice. Okay, but look here, where are the spots of concern, of big concern? Right here, in California, right where the governor lived. Okay, a little bit in Texas here. You can kind of imagine why. What do we do down here? Right, we do lots of things with oil, so there's probably a good chance there's going to be arsenic there. So you can see a lot more in like California there. And where is it relatively safe for arsenic? Well, we're looking for the gray, right? This guy right here. So all through like central Texas and in the Middle East. No, I'm just kidding, not the Middle East, kind of like the Midwestern and the lower eastern United States, right? Southeast. All right, so let's see, mercury. Mercury emissions, so where are we getting them from? Asia, 52%, and you better bet your bottom dollar that's mostly China. But, that's what happens when you're coming up in the world and you're using you're doing an all of the above energy plan. You're going to use coal because it's very, very abundant, and it's pretty efficient for the amount of mass that you take out of the ground, right? It's pretty efficient. You remember that we can get some of our coal plants up to about 95% efficiency, especially if you use things like cogeneration, right? Where you're repumping that hot air back in, right? Let's see, where are we at? North America, 6%, which is crazy because we don't have a gigantic part of the population, right? So this is pretty good, or a pretty good amount that we're using. Okay, acid depositions. Let's talk a little about acid rain. Okay, so acid deposition, deposit on Earth is rain and snow, or gases and particles that attach to the surface of plants, soil, or water. So this is like direct deposition, right? If it's going onto plants and soil, but most of the time it makes it into the water and has some effects through the hydrologic cycle. So remember you have to always remember weather, right? Hydrologic cycle. So remember the hydrologic cycle, right? All that, the precipitation and vaporization, deposition, all that stuff. Now just throw in heavy metals into the mix, and that's you basically understand how acid rain moves, right? But always be able to relate the water cycle to things like this, nutrient cycles and acid deposition. Especially when we're burning coal. Remember that, burning coal, nitrogen dioxide. So this is going to be like sulfuric acid, nitric acid, right? In the atmosphere, these chemicals are converted into sulfuric acid, nitric acid. I just said that. Look, I'm not even looking at my PowerPoint, and I know these things. I'm kind of a little bit proud of myself. Okay? Acid deposition reduces the pH. Remember that acidic is closer to 0. Basic, calling all the basic apes kids. We are going up into the 14 when we're getting basic, right? 7 is neutral. And remember that each move, like say from 7 to 8, is not just one power of hydrogen greater. This is raising it in an order of magnitude. So it's basically multiplying it by 10, right? So remember, if we go from here to here, this is a 10 to the first power change. I go from 7 to 9, since that's 2 hops, that's 10 to the second power, right? Synthetic organic compounds are human-produced chemicals. Okay? Synthetic compounds can enter the water supply from industrial point sources or from non-point sources when they're applied over large areas such as farming. Right? These include pesticides, pharmaceuticals, military compounds, and industrial compounds. So they say don't flush your unused meds down the sink because they can have effects on the environment. You saw today that there were fish that were boy fish that now had girl parts, and they're hermaphroditic fish. They're not that happy, right? They're not able to do what they're supposed to do. Okay? Synthetic organic compounds can be toxic because of genetic defects. And remember, when we're talking about hormonal things, they occur in low dosages. It's the opposite of what you would think. So not high dosage. This bucks the trend, and it's actually the low dose hormones that cause a lot of damage. Okay, pesticides and inert ingredients. This is very interesting to me. This is what we're studying right now. Is that even if a company were to come out and do its own study and go, oh, hey, I injected my favorite pet cat Spot with all of these byproducts that are given off in my plant, and it only, grew 55 tumors instead of 600 like you usually would expect. Even if a company were to self-report and have a lot of integrity and not lie or anything like that, and say that, oh, the chemical that I produce doesn't harm anything, you have to consider that even if it's not acutely deadly, it might have some effects, like with DDT, right? It softened the shells of fish, the eagle shells, and so when they would sit on their eggs to incubate them, they would crush, right? So it decreased their numbers. But you also have to consider that chemicals, sometimes when you mix with other chemicals in the environment, become something that is deadly for an animal, or will change the life functions or the fitness of an animal. So that's why we call them inert, because they're not on their own dangerous, but when they combine with other things, they can be dangerous, right? When they combine, they can be dangerous, or they cause things that are not necessarily acutely deadly, right? So we might overlook them. If your test you're running is to look for death, and it doesn't cause death, but it causes like, oh, I like to drive with my eyes closed now after taking this thing. Like, that's not something that's, acutely going to make you die, but it's something that can affect you down the line, right? So let's look at some of this. What's going on here? Majority of things we flush down the toilet or down the sink are going to be steroids. And obviously these things are not good for fish to have. You don't want Arnold Schwarzenegger fish, right? Non-prescription drugs. This makes sense. It's common sense. You can buy these without any need a prescription. So of course you're going to find a large percentage of them. Antibiotics. You can think about why antibiotics going down the drain might be bad. Bacteria that would normally be killed by antibiotics get exposed to little bits at a time. They will slowly, or actually pretty quickly, evolve to be resistant to that, and pretty soon they will be ineffective, right? Okay, reproductive hormones, even this is pretty low, but even though it's low, we talked about this earlier, right? The lower the dose for hormones, the more likely it's going to affect your body. All right, last couple slides. Military compounds, perchlorates, things you find in rocket fuel. And they contaminate the soil or rockets. Anything that has to do with rockets, you're going to find perchlorates there. All right, other industrial compounds used in manufacturing. These PCBs, polychlorinated biphenyls, used to manufacture plastics. They're responsible for environmental problems. And you saw that in the documentaries that we've watched. Compounds that are used to manufacture plastics can mimic estrogen. They can mimic different types of hormones, right? Especially when exposed to heat. And we will stop here at oil pollution.